Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to breathe. Very important.
Relax. It's time to expand your horizons. My name is Jake, and this is the Photoshop and Illustrator Unleashed podcast. As this course begins to wind down, you might wonder what it's like moving forward beyond this class once you've known Photoshop and Illustrator and what a career path using these programs might look like. Well, for today's podcast, I got to interview Laura Alejo, who is an amazing artist who uses Photoshop and Illustrator every single day for her work and has for years and years. She's worked with giant studios like Buck and Oddfellows, as well as big clients that you've heard of like Nike and IBM, the UN, Google, Facebook, all kinds of huge clients. And the work that she's creating is being done in the software that you are learning right now. But very quickly into this conversation with Laura, you're going to hear how she is not using these tools in any kind of limiting way. To her, story and concept comes first. And we had a really great conversation about her career path and how she creates things using Photoshop and Illustrator on a daily basis. So enjoy this conversation. Hey, Laura, thanks so much for stopping by our podcast.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really excited to talk to you because I've just been looking over your portfolio and you have such an amazing, diverse portfolio. I just really want to discuss how you got to where you are and how you feel about Adobe software and how it plays a role in your work. So why don't we just start with a little bit of background? Could you tell us where you're from and what you do for a living?
So I'm from Barcelona, Spain, and I've been living in New York close to 11 years. And for a living, I come up with different stories and concepts, mostly from brands, but also I do personal work and work with for other causes. And I define myself as an image maker, and the images that I create lately are mostly illustrations.
Okay, interesting. So I really like how you said that you kind of come up with stories. From a perspective of somebody who's just getting into Photoshop and Illustrator, they might not think about how story plays a role, but that was almost one of the first things you said. So could you just tell me a little bit more about how story is involved with that and what role story actually plays with your creation?
Mm-hmm. So I use Adobe software for everything, but for me, that's the technical part of my work. So before I even start touching this software, everything happens in my mind first, and I use paper and pencil all the time. I'm trying to find what it is that I want to do. And then when I have that, when that concept is solid, is when I move to the computer. So that comes later. Cool.
So why don't we just get a little bit more history of how you got to where you are? Because you have been doing this for quite a while. So where did you start becoming an illustrator? Or how did you get to where you are now with your education and just the different career experience that you've had?
I think I started defining myself as an illustrator very recently, actually. I went to art school when I was 17, and it was like an art and design school, but I had no idea exactly what that means. So I started in product design just because I knew I wanted to do, my passion was around the art somewhere, but I had no idea where. And because my parents were a little bit disappointed on me not choosing a career, I chose product design because I thought that sounded more, professional.
Yeah.
And after 4 years, that wasn't the thing that I really liked. So I moved to graphic design. I studied that for a couple of years too. And then you start working in different things, many different things. And life took me through many different paths until now. I think I never had big expectations or really clear what I wanted to do. I just was going for what I like at the moment and always up for a challenge, I will say. So I always say yes to anything, even if I didn't have much experience. And that's how it started. With a group of friends, we had a magazine, a graphic design magazine, when we were studying. And through that, we started to get some different jobs, very random. And one of us was David Pocul, who is a great motion designer. He's working now in Barcelona, and he worked for clients all over the world. And he was the only one studying motion design. So the rest of us, 5 of us, you learn in the go and starting to do projects for clients. So I'm self-taught around motion design. And life brought me to New York, and I started to working at Hush. I was their first employee. So, like all the design responsibilities were mine. So I started just to, apply everything I knew to motion and art direction and design. And then when I became freelance, I decided that I wanted to move towards illustration more.
Okay.
Until now, until now that I'm doing a lot of more, not motion anymore, like a lot of like editorial maybe and branding illustration.
Wow, that's amazing. So you kind of had a non-traditional career path so far. It sounds like a lot of the time you've been working pretty much for yourself and freelancing a lot, and never really had a kind of just a standard job where you're working at a company, with set hours. Is that right?
Well, I had it while I was at Hush Studios.
Okay.
I worked full time for 4 years.
So you've seen both ends of the spectrum. Then you know what it's like working at a company.
Yeah, definitely. And while I was in Barcelona, I was also full time in different places. But I was doing exhibition design. I did that for a couple of years, and then 2 more years I did packaging design, also full time.
Wow. So yeah, that's awesome. You've had lots of different experience. It seems like with lots of different types of design.
Yeah, a lot of different kinds. Yeah, I think that's why I can never define myself as a technical profession. I'm more into telling stories through different mediums because that's what I've been doing all my career. I've never been a technical person for anything in particular.
Yeah, that's great. I love that kind of approach to just storytelling and not really being locked into one particular medium. So I'm curious. Do you have a preference on the way that you worked, or has it kind of just evolved with time? You kind of said that you're just following whatever's most interesting to you, but did you prefer ever working with other people in-house at a company like that, or do you like being on your own as a freelancer and kind of just floating from project to project better?
I love floating from project to project, because that let me, think about new ideas and try different styles. I love working with teams. I think enrich you, everything you do, like you learn a lot of different things. And even now that I'm a freelance, I share a studio with friends who do different things, like a graphic designer, a letterer, a motion artist. So I'm learning continuously from them. So I don't think I could be freelance, being by myself. I also go to companies to work. So even if I'm freelance, I go for 2 weeks, work with someone, and another week I work with an agency. It's like I move around a lot and I enjoy that,
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's something that's worth knowing for students who are just getting into this industry, realizing that there are options, because at least it seems like most people start out by being hired on at a company, but the idea of freelance can sometimes be really intimidating, especially if you're thinking about doing it just on your own and being completely isolated by yourself, working from home or out of your own office.
Yeah.
But the reality is you can find places that are looking, like studios that are looking for freelancers to work in-house for a couple weeks at a time, or potentially, bringing you on for even extended periods of time, for months, for projects that are bigger. And then, like you said, there's even the option of just having a studio space that you're sharing with other freelance artists. And I love the idea of being able to surround yourself with people who are really great at things that you aren't, and continuously learning from them. I think that's so important to do at any point in your career.
Yeah. The only thing I will say, I don't think it's easy to be a freelance when you start. I started as a freelance when I had this magazine and we were doing small projects, but it was really hard to get any money, like we were surviving. So it's hard. I think it's important, but to me, I think it's the full-time experience is really important, really, really important, because that makes you make some connections. Also,
right.
As freelance, you need to be really organized and know how to talk to clients, and you need to know the whole production side, and that you can learn by yourself. You can't. I mean, you can with years and, with a lot of suffering, but I think like to form yourself as a professional and be able to deliver and do things the right way, you need to learn from others, and the best way is having a full-time job. I don't think I will have to get where I am without the full-time jobs that I had,
Yeah, I totally agree. That's great advice too. I worked at a production studio for 5 years before I started freelancing, and I even with that experience, the transition to freelance was difficult, and I had to learn a lot of things the hard way in that first year.
Mhm.
So I totally 100% agree with that. I'm curious, do you ever animate as well? Are you ever doing motion design, or are you primarily just designing and illustrating for it?
I used to animate. When I started to learn motion design, what I was learning mostly was animation, also self-taught. So I was never like technical enough,
Mhm.
like, so I used to animate, but not to a great level. So at some point when I came to New York and I here, like the professions are really divided sometimes. When I started to work at places, they will start to hire me for more for illustration than animation. So at the end, by default, I just started to do design. And I don't animate anymore, but because I knew how to more or less, I have good knowledge in how to direct other people or how to talk to animators. I think in that way my work can be better, because I'm not isolated just doing animation. I know how to prep the files. I know the problems they're going to encounter, or if something
Right.
is really difficult to animate because you're drawing a line in a character and then it's not going to be easy to do, than After Effects. So I know that, but I don't animate anymore.
I'm curious, did you animate inside of any specific program, or was the medium that you were animating in kind of just all over the place?
No, it was After Effects mostly.
Yeah, so I can totally see how that would give you a good foundation and understanding of how the artwork needs to be prepared for the animator. So that's
Mhm.
great experience for sure. Why don't we talk a little bit more about software? You already kind of mentioned that you're using Photoshop and Illustrator. Are those the primary programs that you're using? And are there any others? Do you prefer any one over the other?
No, I use every day of my life Photoshop and Illustrator. Those are my main programs, and yeah, it will be impossible to
Okay.
do it without them. And I
Yeah.
use those. That's it. Those are my two to go. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome, and I hope that students can that are listening right now can understand just why we're putting so much importance on these two programs now, because clearly they're a big part of your career. Like you said, you couldn't do your job without them.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. Do you do a lot of sketching on paper? I'm assuming you do, just based on your portfolio. But are you doing any sketching physically on paper beforehand,
Yeah.
before you move into Photoshop and Illustrator?
I think always, probably because my education, where I come from, when I started, my school was not big on software.
Hmm.
Didn't have computers. Like I got my first computer when I was, I think, in my fourth year of career. So I was used to do everything on paper, and I still do. So I can't think with a computer. Like
Hmm.
my mind connects to my hand and a pencil
Yeah.
to the Wacom. And even now, I have a Cintiq, the one that
Hmm.
you can draw on top. I
Right.
try to do it sometimes, but it's not the same. So I always sketch. I think always the way I sketch, what I like to sketch in paper, is because you can see your process. You can have
Yeah.
multiple pages with different sketches and ideas. And then once I have something, I take a picture, and I put it in my computer and start from there.
Yeah. I 100% agree with the whole Cintiq just not being the same. I think it's pretty much as close as you can get to drawing on paper digitally. But when you bring out a pencil and a piece of paper, it feels different, and it's so much more permanent. You can't just hit undo if you didn't like the last stroke.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Did you start using Adobe software right from the beginning of the career? I mean, you already kind of mentioned that the school that you went to was kind of discouraging of that, but how soon into becoming an illustrator did you start using Photoshop and Illustrator, and how did you learn?
As soon as I got a computer, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, those I've been using those forever. I haven't used, well, not true. Freehand was a very big one.
Oh yeah.
Instead of Illustrator. So I started with freehand because I was studying graphic design. So everything was done in freehand. Quark Express. I haven't said these names in years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was at the beginning. So I think I learned, about Beziers and all those things in there. As soon as I wanted to do something more illustrative, that software wouldn't let me. Freehand was a little similar to Illustrator, but it didn't have the flow that Illustrator have. It was way easier to draw in Illustrator with like different things. At that point I will pick freehand or Illustrator for different kind of projects. At some point, freehand died, so everybody that I knew moved to Illustrator. It wasn't easy, I think, for the first year to have.
Yeah.
But then, it was Illustrator first, and when I even wanted to do something even more with more expression and more freedom, then I moved to Photoshop. But very early on, maybe that happened the first year, like altogether. Yeah.
Was that transition from Illustrator, a vector artwork to pixel-based artwork difficult at all, or was it really exciting for you because you saw the new possibilities? How was that transition?
It was really interesting. It was also like a kind of trend. I think in the early 2000s, everything was vector. I think people using Photoshop were using it to retouch photos, not create. It was like two different fields. But somehow we started. Like, I don't even remember how. It was just there, and like I can't even remember how I started. Illustrator, I remember how I started because it was attached to graphic design.
Right.
Photoshop just happened. I was using Photoshop also at the beginning to create more realistic kind of images, like more collagey and really high end. Even when I moved to New York, like commercials for cars and things like that, where you need like lighting and photorealistic compositions. But I don't know, later on I just started drawing on it. Like I can't even remember, but always, that's also, I think, what's amazing about these two programs together is like you can do so many different things, depend how you use it.
Right.
You use it for photorealistic things, and you can combine both. You can bring things in and out. And I think in the last years, the compatibility has gotten much better. Like sometimes I'm annoyed that why they don't mix them up.
I feel the same way. And that's a discussion that I've even had a little bit with the students already. It seems like Illustrator was primarily created for graphic design and the print world, whereas Photoshop was, like you said, a lot more for photography and photo retouching. But as the careers have kind of evolved and motion design has come up and taken advantage of both softwares, I think Adobe has started to recognize that they need to have more uses, and they're bringing the two programs a lot more close together in the way that they work with each other, which is great for us as motion designers because the closer they get together, I think in the workflow, the easier it is for us to jump back and forth between programs. And that actually leads me right into my next question. I'm curious, you said that sometimes you are using both Photoshop and Illustrator together. What does that kind of workflow look like, and why do you use both together on any given project?
So I like to create things that look real in the sense that they look closer to art or things that are like in the material world, like textures and kind of handmade.
Sure.
So to get that, I need Photoshop. But sometimes just drawing in Photoshop don't give me the shapes that I really want. I'm better look at curves and compositions in Illustrator because I can manage things. I can model pretty much, things. Hope I can do it so much. So I always, when I'm looking for like a more precise look, for like characters or things like that, I always do it in Illustrator because it lets me control it much better and repeat. Like I have a character drawn in Illustrator, and I can, copy next to it, duplicate, and do a little change, and duplicate again. It's super fast. And I can do little tweaks with vector. And once I have it more or less resolved there, I take it to Photoshop. And there, like, I repaint, or, I just turn the shapes in Illustrator to color shapes in Photoshop and start tweaking from there. But just for composition and proportions, I like Illustrator better.
Yeah, that's great, and I totally agree with you. I feel like each program has a very good strength, and even though you can do vector paths inside of Photoshop, I feel like Illustrator is just such a better, a more diverse tool to be able to handle those kinds of paths and work with them, and like you said, just quickly duplicate them and make a change and see how it looks. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, the precision that you get in Illustrator, you don't get it in Photoshop.
Right.
And with the smart object, it's great because you bring a vector shape.
Yes.
Then you can modify it later on if you think you need it. Like before, you were not able to do that. So it was.
Yep. I remember when I first learned Photoshop, smart objects was not not a thing.
No.
And that really changed a lot of how you could work in Photoshop so much more non-destructively. So I'm curious, when you're designing, it doesn't sound like this is the case, but have you ever limited yourself to what you're creating based on what you know Photoshop and Illustrator can do, or what you know that you can do in the programs? Or is it always the concept and the story that's coming first and tools secondary?
It's the concept and story, and I look a lot of references in the art world. So
Okay.
I'm always fighting for the software to be able to do what I'm looking for. Every day I fight with Illustrator and Photoshop because I'm always searching for the right, like I always try. It's really hard. Like, this is my struggle, that I'm always trying to come up with different ways of doing things. So it's a daily fight that I'm going to start to a new project. I'm saying, like, I'm going to do something differently, and
Right.
I spend like the morning trying different brushes, and it's hard to get out of the way you work normally, like I really try, but then always kind of like looks the same. And some people call that style.
Right.
That it's like my fight. That is, no, I'm not getting where I want exactly, because the software, so many years doing the same that it's hard to use different tools. I find that
Absolutely.
I'm lucky that I'm, surrounded by people who use this software too. So they always tell me, oh, there's a new thing, like you can do this way. And I try maybe, for a day, I try to do it that way. And, I may learn something from it, but to change my workflow, it's pretty much impossible.
No, I can again relate to that completely. Just seeing other people's work and seeing how other people are trying new things is sometimes very intimidating, because, like you said, you just kind of default back to your own style or the way that you've done things in the past. So constantly challenging yourself and looking at it as a fight with yourself. I love that perspective. And I can totally relate. I think that's something that will stick with you for your entire career. It sounds like it has for you. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you can use that to really push yourself to try new things and to learn new things.
Definitely. And something that I've been doing lately is I charge for that time. I didn't do it before.
Oh, yeah.
The last year or 2 years maybe, I'm charging the client with an exploration phase that is basically me fighting with Illustrator and Photoshop. Because I need that week or 10 days, to be able to find things. If not, I will end up doing the same thing over and over. So now I'm like, I call it exploration phase, but it's really me just trying to find different ways to work. And I look at my work, it's like, it still looks pretty similar, but I don't think it's intentional from my part. Like, every time I have a new meeting with a client, like, we're going to do something that fits you, that it's going to be different. And that's why the exploration phase is there. And I try, and I think it looks quite different, but it's not, you still can see the default in there.
Yeah, you can still tell that it's Laura's work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. And I really like the idea of putting that in and charging that for your client, because the reality is they're hiring you because they want your expertise, they want your artwork. So being able to charge for that time is, I think, totally justifiable. But putting it into the contract and to the bid sheet or whatever as exploration phase, that's a great way to put it. And because then you're not directly telling the client that, you know what, I'm going to charge you for a week of me just trying to figure out what I want to do. But it is in their benefit, because, like you said, you're creating something that fits the client's needs.
Yeah, and I always try to explain that that's the most important part. I'm really fast when I work because, I have a good understanding of the software and everything. So I'm really, really fast when I illustrate, but I need to know what's the style that I'm doing. When I find the technique for that special project, I can be super fast. But if I don't have that first part, it's really, really hard, So I need that 2 first weeks to figure out. Once that's done, I just go,
So during that exploration phase, are you looking a lot of other places for inspiration and trying to figure out what you want that style to be?
Yes, I'm in constant search of inspiration. Are
you usually looking online, or do you have other resources too?
I look a lot online because that's the easiest, but I also buy a lot of books. And lately, because I have kids, I buy tons of children's books, and that had
Oh yeah.
a whole world to me. And not even like modern books, like I have like other friends, like especially because I didn't grow up here, I didn't know about like people who like really good illustrators. So now I discover people like Mayra Kalman, and that I love, like the things she does, and
Yeah.
it's the storytelling also that I'm drawn to, how they represent a story, or like what are they telling and why they did it this way. And I don't look that much for inspiration for look. I mean, not for look, but like for brushes or textures. Like
Sure.
there's something that I like about the way I do it. I also look at abstract painting. I love abstract painting and the way the colors work and the way the shapes work. I look at that a lot. So I look like, I don't know, I use a lot Pinterest or Instagram even these days.
Yeah, Instagram has been really popular lately for artists. I feel like that's kind of been a trend. I hope it stays around because I'm now following so many artists that I didn't even know about, and just being able to see their process a lot of times, how they're creating any specific piece is just really fascinating.
Exactly. I don't like to look at specifically maybe like motion artists in there, because I feel we get too inspired from them,
You're right.
and end up very similar things. But artists that I didn't have access before, like people doing really interesting things. I'm very attracted to color and shape. That's what I look for mostly.
Yeah, and I love the idea of finding inspiration in children's books because I also have a young son, and I do the same thing. A lot of times my wife and I will go to thrift stores and we'll look for children's books, and a lot of times they're very old and ones that we've never heard of. And the art style from book to book is just so different. It's like every single children's book is approached in a completely different way. And, there's this one book that we have that every other page is in color and then every other page is in black and white. And I don't know if that was just because the printer wanted to save money on ink, but it just made a really interesting way to tell a story going from these colorful pages to just line art. So you never know where you're going to find that inspiration.
Yeah, it's amazing because I think also, when you do a children's book, you don't have a client. The client
Right.
are the people with more imagination and freedom in the world who are like child. And then people are free to do whatever they want, to express themselves. So I think illustration for children's books is closer to art, because you are letting go of feelings and things. And I'm really interested in that. I try to bring that to my commercial work. Sometimes it's hard, but
yeah.
I try to bring that, that this pure expression of that story or the things you want to communicate versus, doing something more technical or more expected.
I'm curious if we could talk a little bit more about motion design now and designing for that. When you are designing for motion, do you feel like you're handling the art in a different way or creating the art in a different way than if it was just a still illustration?
Yeah, definitely, because I'm thinking about the process, and a lot of how I design things depends on the budget sometimes. So if you need that much budget to animate, you need to do something more simpler.
Sure.
Go into crazy things. So I think that when I worked mostly in motion, when we were doing pitches, there was a tendency at the beginning of do crazy boards for the pitches, to win the pitch. You win the thing and you have no idea how to do that. And suddenly you need 2 3D guys, and then you need to bring so many people in, and your budget doesn't work, and
right.
I think now I'm very conscious of that, even if I'm just doing the design, because lately, because I'm working in my studio more and I don't go that much to motion studios, but I still I always ask them, what's your team, what's your budget, and I start designing for that. Maybe they just need a vector of, I'm not going to apply textures to the things that are molding to the shape because they are not going to be able to do that, later on in After Effects or.
Right.
So yeah, definitely. It's a different process when I design for motion.
Yeah. So that's really wise, because I think that sometimes when you're being taught design, even if it is for motion design, that the boards phase is a lot of times looked at as kind of unlimited, just design whatever you want it to look like. But it sounds like you don't want to limit yourself too much, but you are still very aware of the resources that your team has, and you're not you're not going to do something that's just not possible with the budget or the team that you have. Which I think that's super wise.
Yeah, if you do like a personal project or you are doing something with time and you don't have limitations, then it's the time to explore. But if you are looking for a professional career, at some point you need to be clever, because if not, you're not going to make a living out of this. So you need to pick your battles, I think. And a lot of people are always experimenting, and they do designs that are super crazy, and then they fight and they find a way to produce that emotion. But you need to be clear with every project what's your goal for that project. You can do artistic thing and exploration all the time. You need to focus on, this project. I have, a month to do it. I'm going to do it this way. This one is more personal. I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to explore forever. But you need to be clear when you start and what the expectations are.
That's great advice. We talked a little bit about it, how you're trying to choose a different style. A lot of times you're always exploring new things. But there are different artists that have very specific styles and very specific skill sets. Do you think that it is better or worse to be focusing on one particular thing and trying to become really great at that one thing, and whether that's, even within animation, do you think becoming a really great 3D artist and only doing that 3D art and maybe only picking one style and becoming really great at that, is that kind of limiting to you as an artist, or do you think that that's still something that might be a good career path to take?
Mm-hmm. For me, it's hard to think that that's a choice. I think you do it the way that your personality chooses. I don't know, there's people whose tendency, is to draw the same thing over and over, because they're trying to express themselves, and that's what comes out. That's the way they are, and it's really hard for them to change. And there's people like me who really like this exploration phase because it thrills me and it gives me, something. So I need that. So I couldn't be doing the same thing every time. So I don't know if it's like a career choice, for some people maybe, but maybe at some point you find yourself fighting against what you really want to do,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I can totally relate to that too, because I see myself jumping around from one style to the next and always wanting to try something new. But there are artists out there who are so specific in their skills. Like, people will be hired because they're really, really good at compositing or doing a specific type of 3D particle system or something, and they're better than anyone else, so they get hired just for that. But I love the perspective of thinking of it like a personality.
Yeah, and there's a market for both. So I don't think it's a better choice if you look at outcomes. I think there's a market for both.
Yeah, that's great to know that you can approach it in lots of different ways.
Yes, lucky that we can allow ourselves to have fun with what we do, and I think that's the more important thing. If you need to spend a lot of hours doing something, you need to do it the way you enjoy it, because you're gonna end up not wanting to do it. So it's all connected.
I find that my best work is coming from when I catch myself enjoying the work. When I'm starting to get frustrated or just burnt out, that's when I can visibly see that my art is suffering from it.
Totally. I don't think nobody enjoys to be sitting on a chair for 8-9 hours a day. You do it when you are in the flow and you are having fun in there. And at some point, the project doesn't interest you much. You find yourself like going for coffee all the time, trying. Yeah. You are not concentrated, like when you enjoy, when you get into this mood, then it's fun, then you produce good work.
Now, I'm curious, you said that you started out working at a studio, but when you started dealing with your own clients and working towards bigger and bigger clients, was that a kind of a difficult thing to learn how to deal with the client? And do you ever still get intimidated potentially with big clients that you work with or studios?
Not really. I've always been very humble. I always went to places trying to learn and always explaining where my capacities were and what my flows were. So being very open about what can you do and what not. You've been humble. I think it helps, because you don't give people expectations that you can accomplish later. So, and then you also realize clients probably is different, but with the studios, even working with the best studios, people are nice. In general, if you're nice, people are nice back, and you work as a team.
Yeah.
They're not looking for the competitions. With client, maybe a little different. But I haven't worked directly with clients until the past years, the last 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different thing. But I think now at this point, I have my process so nailed down that it's easier to speak with people when you know exactly what you are doing, and I think it's really, really useful to have a plan and a system, even when you do an estimate, and very clear what you are doing, so you can go there secure that they're not going to take you to a different direction or something, and you're confident and you go step by step. And for me specifically, make sure that we are going step by step and there's no surprises. So I'm not intimidated because I have a plan.
And it's really great to hear too about bigger studios, just because you work with studios like Buck and Oddfellows, which in the motion design industry are looked at, with such admiration.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was ever, if I had the opportunity to work for Buck, I think I would be terrified, because I look at their work and the quality of it, and I'm so impressed by it. You made a great point of just saying that if you're nice, then people will want to work with you. And I think that's something that is a really valuable lesson that I've learned in this industry in general, is that you just want to be somebody that other people want to work with, because if you're that person, then they're going to want to continue to work with you, and it'll be just a more pleasant experience.
Totally. And when you work with so talented people and senior people, if they're good, they know how to direct you. So they're going to get from you the best of you, so that's really important to let you, you need to go and relax and let them help you, because you go there with your skills. Yeah. But like at Buck, they're the creative director, like all the people who have been there for years, they're so talented that they know how to help you, and they're really good with people too. Really easy to work with them. Sometimes it's harder to work with more junior people, new studios, because they don't know exactly the process. But I think when they are good, like the studios who are good, they know what they are doing, so they're gonna bring you to the next level. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. Okay, so I'm curious now. Then we talked about your professional career, but are you creating work for yourself in your personal time as well?
Yeah, I've always done. Because I need to do it. I know there's things that I need to express. And with illustration is the way I can do it.
But you're also a mother and a wife, so you have a family, and you even have twins.
Mm-hmm.
So how does creating artwork for yourself like that, something that you have this desire that you have to do to express yourself, but also managing your family and the other parts of your personal life, how does that work together? How are you still able to find the time with your professional work and your family to be able to make something for yourself in whatever free time you have?
Mm-hmm. I think from very early on when they were born, and it took me a while to get pregnant, so I had time to plan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, it wasn't easy at the time, but then I think it was a good thing. So like for a couple of years, I had like a lot of time to think how I was gonna direct my career to have a space for my family, and that's when I started to work more from the studio and say like, I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. Also very on, I knew that I wanted to continue with my career because it's my passion. That's what I like to do. So I searched for help really early on. I knew that I was not gonna be happy just being at home all day, or even trying to work from home with 2 babies was like impossible. So we have help very early on. And maybe for the first year, I work way less hours, maybe 5 hours a day or so. But when I was at work, I was at work. I was focused and I was doing what I had to do. And I always use like the first thing in the morning, like, when you have kids, you wake up really early.
Right.
I will go to the studio earlier, and dedicate maybe the first hour or as much as I can, like I had some ideas and I just sketch those ideas. And what happened to me, like in the middle of the day, maybe I'm doing something and I have an idea and I sketch that idea, so it just flows. I don't really put time aside to do personal work unless I'm working on series. Like lately, I came up with, I think it's because of the storytelling and because I lately been obsessed with graphic novels that I'm working on a lot of series of things. So once I have the concept, yes, I want to finish the series. So I set up some time on the side. But if not, it's very organic. And when I finish that, when I finish my hours in the studio, after that, it's time for my family, so it's very separate. But I always carry a sketchbook with me all day long, even to the playground. Like, I'm enough that I think at some point I'm going to be drawing when they're playing. But I just carry it with me just in case. I always carry it just in case.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a very important lesson to learn too. If you're working for yourself, is that you do have to learn how to separate your work time and treat that as work time from your family time. And that's something I'm still learning because, I'm new to being a dad, and freelance is just something that you grow with as you get older and you have more experience. You learn how to manage it in more efficient ways.
Yeah, I think also because I had twins. I think if I had one baby, it would have been different. But with twins, it was impossible to work in the space where they were.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
So it's like I couldn't do it. So but I can't do this. I can do both things at the same time. I'm not going to be good at both things if I try to do them at the same time. So.
Okay, this final couple of questions, I'd just like to see if you have any advice for our students. They're just getting into Photoshop and Illustrator, and kind of probably a lot of them are just getting exposed to motion design for the first time. I'm curious if you have any advice on working in Photoshop or Illustrator at any level, whether it's just a workflow tip or trick or best practices that you feel like they should be aware of going into motion design, any kind of advice for the actual software.
I think be patient. I don't have like super tricks. I think also it's hard to talk about tricks because every person does it differently. But I think being patient and probably looking at the advices that the same software gives you. I'm always like too busy to click when they're trying to give you an advice inside the software. But what I've done, I've always find something new.
Yeah.
So I try to click there. Also, like when you're trying to do something, maybe you watch a YouTube video. It's super useful. For me, I don't need much YouTube because I have people around who are super nerds and I can how they work. But I think these days with YouTube tutorials, you can get the same info, and it's amazing, how people use the software. I don't have any particular thing. I use a range of things. I think also depends what your style, Alex Trochut, who I work with, he's a really good graphic designer. Like everything he does is very geometrical and a lot of vector and colors and very complicated things that he gets to do in Illustrator. So he does that. He has his tricks for that, and I have others, mostly like in Photoshop, how my workflow is. So I think it depends what your style is. You're going to go for one thing or the others. But if at some point you feel you're lost, I think, ask someone how they do it. Look over someone's shoulder, see how they do it, or watch some tutorials. I think there's a lot to do. I'm sure that I'm just using 20% of the software. How I didn't know about this is probably because I didn't need it at the time. You are like learning as you go, and probably never stop learning because there's thousands ways to do the same thing and to do.
Yes. Yeah, and that's something I'm trying to communicate to the students as well. That is such great advice about even just watching YouTube tutorials and seeing how other people are working in the same software is so valuable because, like you said, you're probably only using 20% of Photoshop. It is such a deep program with so many features that you've probably never even seen, just because, like you said, because you haven't needed them or because you just didn't know that you needed them. I'm constantly discovering new things. And even though I'm teaching students a specific way on how to use these programs, and it's kind of the way that I'm envisioning the best workflow between programs for motion design, doesn't mean that you would be working in the programs in the same way. You might not use the panels in the same way that I lay them out, and you might use smart objects differently than I do. But in the end, it's just getting comfortable and figuring out your style, like you said, figuring out your workflow and realizing that there are probably 10 different ways to do any task in either of these programs.
I think the only thing I will insist on when you are using software is being organized. Most important thing. You need to be organized and have everything named, and the layers are super important. Like if you start designing, at some point you have like 100, 200 layers and you haven't organized it by groups. It's a nightmare, especially for motion design. For illustration, it's just one layer at the end, doesn't matter. But when you're working for motion design and you don't start organizing from the beginning, you're going to take so long to prep those files for animation later that it's a mess. And also creating libraries. I think I've been using a lot of libraries for color, and now with the brushes that you can do folders in brushes, it's also really good because I select the brushes for a project, and then if you don't archive them, you can find them. And also, when you are working with a team, you need to share those assets. So like having everything very organized, having libraries in place, brushes in folders with the name of the project, always everything name and number, then you are able to share really fast. If not, it's impossible. It happened to me, I think now the whole folders in places for libraries and brushes saved my life, because I will use a brush and then never find it again.
Yeah, I agree. I used to do the same thing because I'm sure you're familiar with Kyle Webster's brushes in Photoshop, and there would be countless times where I would use a brush that I really liked the texture of this brush on a project, and then a few months later I'd come back to it and I'd be like, I remember using this brush. I can see the art that I created with it, but I don't remember what it was called. And there's hundreds of them to go sort through and try and find what you were looking for. So the ability now to be able to organize those brushes, I agree, is just fantastic.
But it needs to come from you, because Photoshop doesn't do it by itself. So it's like you move from a project to another in different windows, and the brush is not ingrained in the file. You need to find it.
Right.
So I think that they may do it at some point, but right now they are not doing it. So as soon as you start something, before you start drawing anything, create your structure, in your folder.
Yeah.
As soon as you start, before you even, draw a line.
I can completely attest to that being such a vital part of motion design, because even if you're designing for yourself to animate something, especially if just, for example, a character design, once that character is designed, it has to be rigged for animation, and the rigging process has to be extremely organized. And it depends on you having labeled everything correctly in your layer structure in Photoshop or Illustrator. So I just want to confirm and just reaffirm that response, that it is so important to stay organized.
And if you are working with people, I always ask the animators first. So there's a particular way you want me to organize this before I start. Because I've seen so many times that I create a file super organized and I think it's perfect, and I give it to them and they're like, take 2 days. Okay, what are we doing wrong? So I think also communicate with your team, it's really good, because people do things in different ways. So it's like, no, you don't need to put all the facial features in the same place. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do it this way. Just make, groups by character. Don't even worry about everything else, because I have a particular way to do it. So it doesn't matter, and always communicate.
That's also amazing advice. Just staying open and keeping that dialogue going will just help the entire process be so much smoother. Mm-hmm. Well, Laura, this has been an eye-opening conversation. I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and give us some advice and some insight into your career. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been really, really fun.
I loved being able to talk to Laura about her career path and how she's using these two tools to create amazing looking work on a daily basis. Some of the main takeaways that I got from our conversation was that everybody's different. Some people are like Laura, and I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat, where we're constantly moving on to the next thing, challenging ourselves, trying to find a new style and develop something that looks new and different and fresh. But she called that a personality, and that's really how I think you should look at it. Some people might not be in that boat and want to find a very specific style and develop that style and continue to refine it until they've developed their own personal look, and that's what they're known for. And there's nothing wrong with that. Her tips on working with teams and other people and surrounding yourself with other people that are better at what they do than you are is amazing advice. That is one of the best ways to be able to immerse yourself into the community and improve yourself constantly in a variety of different ways. Seeing how other people who are really good at what they do their work is one of the best ways to learn. And with today's technology, like she said, just finding videos on YouTube and watching other people work. There's even a series through Adobe called Adobe Live, where every week they do multiple live streams with artists creating actual work that you can tune into for free, is a great way to learn new techniques. And I want to highlight the point that she made of staying organized from the start. Before she even creates anything, she'll build a folder structure inside of Photoshop for where specific elements are going to go. That is so important, and I couldn't agree more with her. Especially when you're working with somebody else. If you're making something that somebody else is going to be working with, not only should you stay organized, like she said, you should just go to them and ask them, how would you like me to set this file up for you? Because you may be taking more steps than you need to prepping the artwork for the animation because of the way that that particular motion designer animates. Regardless though, even if you're making artwork for yourself, staying organized, labeling every single layer, keeping things organized in folders, and even highlighting them with different colors is going to make everything so much easier to keep track of and work with. I hope you got as much out of this conversation with Laura as I did, and that our conversation was inspiring to you so that moving forward, once you're done with this class, you're excited to take the new skills that you've learned, the technical skills that we're teaching you here, and start applying them to future projects. That's all for this podcast. Thanks for listening.